Now that we have a larger sample size, we can talk about what is not just something they'll try, maybe, but what is clearly the new electoral strategy, to the extent that we can even call it a strategy, from the modern Republican Party. And that strategy, or maybe the right word for it would be more of a tactic, is to call an election rigged, to say that there was fraud before we actually even know the results. We started to see this with Donald Trump months before the 2020 presidential election. And of course, it has become essentially the story told by Republicans about the 2020 election. It was rigged, it was fraud, mail-in ballots, massive dumps of ballots. We need forensic audits. There were bamboo fibers. There was too much barbecue sauce on the papers. There was not enough. Okay, maybe not that last one, but you get the point. This is the story. It's the election wasn't fair. Trump should be president. That's the story being told by the right. And then we saw the exact same thing with Larry Elder in advance of this week's California gubernatorial recall. Let's go. I know I've played these clips already this week, but let's go to Larry Elder being asked by Jacob Sabaroff, will you commit to accepting the results of this election? This was the day before the recall.
Again, whether or not you win or lose, will you accept the results of the election tomorrow?
I think we all ought to be looking at election integrity, no matter whether you're a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican. Let's all make sure that the election is a fair election. So let's all work together, no matter what the results are, to make sure that the results are valid and legitimate, and everybody who voted should have voted. Let's all do that together.
Is that a commitment to accept the results of the election tomorrow?
Let's all do that together. Let's all work together on both sides of the aisle to make sure that the election is a fair election.
We know that's very familiar. It's very familiar for a reason. And then also, here was Donald Trump doing the same thing on Newsmax an extra week earlier as well.
Got the recall election coming up in less than a week. It's actually happening as we speak. The polls appear to show Newsom looks safer at this point. Larry Elder is the man that could take it from him. What do you think happens in California?
Well, it's probably rigged. They're sending out all ballots. It's all the ballots are, mail out, mail in ballots. In fact, I guess you even have a case where you can make your own ballot. When that happens, nobody's going to win except these Democrats. So, look, they're very good. The one thing they're good at is rigging elections. So I predict it's a rigged election. Let's see how it turns out.
So this is now a strategy, and none of this is surprising. There is a very good Washington Post article about this. Former President Trump's false voter fraud claims found new life in California's biggest election this year. The top Republican seeking to replace Governor Gavin Newsom in Tuesday's recall declined before the election to say whether he would accept the results. A website affiliated with his campaign invites visitors to sign a petition to stop the fraud of the California recall election. And a previous version of the site, published before the election took place, blamed voter fraud for Newsom being, quote, reinstated as governor. Now, it's funny to even say reinstated. He was never removed. The article goes on to explain, of course, there is no evidence for these claims, which have nonetheless been amplified repeatedly by Trump, but their arrival in the country's largest blue state offered proof of their currency within the Republican Party, where some leaders have increasingly sought to undermine public confidence in Democratic victories. That's an understatement. By baselessly alleging that elections are vulnerable to manipulation. It does mention with Newsom projected to defeat the recall, Elder conceded the race early Wednesday morning, telling his audience to be gracious in defeat. But the campaign tactics leading up to the vote, including open threats to raise doubts about the results in case of defeat, suggest the possibility of a new normal where Republicans challenge election losses, even in heavily Democratic states, without proof of serious fraud or rule breaking. This is going to be the strategy. Now, none of it should surprise us. It is, number one, straight out of Trump's playbook. Elder is essentially a Trump clone, agreeing with Trump on just about everything. If a Republican wins the election, then we can trust the results. Everything is as it should be. No fraud took place. If they lose, then it's rigged. And this is going to be, I believe, their MO from here on out. And not only is this concerning because it is the next step in Republicans completely abandoning trying to win on issues, I'm not going to give you the whole story that Noam Chomsky and I discussed of how this came to be, because it goes all the way back to the civil rights movement and that era. But recently, at least as recent history is concerned, as far as recent history is concerned, we saw, particularly in the Obama era, and obviously when Trump ran, Trump pretended to be about policy when he ran, although they were all completely unrealistic policy promises based on misstatements about the world, right? A completely bogus promise to build a wall across the entire southern border with Mexico that Mexico would pay for, based on lies about the immigration situation. So the framework was lies, and the proposed solution was never going to happen. He was never going to build that wall. Mexico was never going to pay for it. But it was like pretending to be about policy. To the 2020 election, not even pretending to be about policy. That's Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's Madison Cawthorn. That's Lauren Boebert. They don't even pretend to be about policy. And then the next step is, despite not actually doing policy or campaigning on policy, when you lose, you say that it was rigged. This is very authoritarian. It is very authoritarian, and it's a very dangerous new status quo if that's indeed what it's going to be. And you know what the signal was that they were going to do it? In 2016, Trump won electorally and still didn't accept the results of the popular vote. Remember, he said Hillary Clinton didn't even really win the popular vote. She won because of millions of illegal immigrants that voted, and or, people from Massachusetts were being bussed up to New Hampshire to vote. Of course, ignoring the fact that none of those Massachusetts people would be registered to vote in New Hampshire. They wouldn't be able to vote in New Hampshire. But every election now is going to be fraudulent until and unless there start to be consequences for telling that lie time after time after time. And it is, I don't think I have to explain this to you, but there's also it's not even a hypocrisy. It's sort of like a conflict between, they claim that, I guess, the Democratic Party, although think about the number of people that would need to be involved. They claim the Democratic Party is smart enough to manufacture millions of fraudulent votes and get away with it, but they don't actually put the votes in places where it would have a bigger effect on the race. Like, it just, none of it makes sense. And with regard to Trump, there's one other aspect to this. Narcissists can't admit to being wrong. So when the polling data started to show Trump's going to lose, Elder is going to lose, particularly with Elder recently, they started the campaign. Well, if they win, it's because they've stolen it. If they win, it's because it's rigged. Because they can't just say, we were just wrong. California didn't want to remove Gavin Newsom. We miscalculated. We were wrong. They have to go to, it was actually fraud. And then maybe the most insidious and scary part, which maybe they're not competent enough for, is that this could end up being part of a cry wolf strategy. Claim that there's fraud when there isn't in a whole bunch of races where they lose. Then they commit the fraud in some future election. And then when Democrats say, guys, there was real fraud here, then they brush it off and they say, guys, everybody's sick of these claims of fraud. Just accept that these are the results. I hope that that doesn't happen because they're not organized enough to do it. But that's a scary aspect of this as well. One of our sponsors is CuriosityStream, the only subscription streaming service just for documentaries. My girlfriend and I have been using the CuriosityStream platform at home nonstop. I can tell you from personal experience, much better documentary selection than Netflix, Hulu, or Amazon. On CuriosityStream, I'm always finding documentaries by the world's best filmmakers, stuff you can't find on other streaming services. Last month, they added a ton of awesome new titles to the library. I just finished watching Becoming Martian, about the future of the human species and its possible path through Mars. But there's documentaries on every topic imaginable: science, nature, history, politics. If you love documentaries the way I do, you are not going to find a better source of brand new, award-winning docs anywhere else. CuriosityStream is giving my audience 25% off. That means you can subscribe for just $15 a year. Very reasonable, considering the endless number of super quality documentary content that you have access to. Just go to curiositystream.com/Pacman. The link is right underneath this video.